Buenas tardes, buenos días a todos. Good morning, good afternoon to everybody. My name is Jazmín Chavez, and I'm the Associate Vice President of Public Affairs for Hispanics and Philanthropy. And it is my great honor and privilege to be with all of you this morning. For me, it's morning. I am currently out of Cheyenne Territory, Denver, Colorado, and it's 11 o'clock over here, but I'm sure it's different time zones everywhere else. Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. This panel is specifically incredibly important. Obviously, right now, we're still in a pandemic. We're not in a post-pandemic world yet, and I'm really excited to connect today with Marcos, with Jonathan, and Marcela to really discuss the ways in which COVID-19 has disrupted not just migratory flows, migrant communities, but also look at the ways in which communities have been able to be really resilient and be able to respond. For me, myself, at the height of the pandemic, I was in New York City. I lived in Harlem, and it was very real, right? As one of the areas that became ground zero at the height of the pandemic, the very first thing, and I remember speaking with Amalia Delgado, our other vice president, and with our teams, and saying this is gonna devastate our communities. This is something that is going to impact us. What are we doing? How quickly do we need to shift resources? What is happening? And we quickly connected with organizations in New York City first, because that was the first really landing of the virus here in the United States. We were connecting with communities in California, and we knew that that was going to trickle into the interior of the states. And at the same time, we're looking at what was happening in Mexico. We were looking at what was going to happen in Latin America. And so we really tried to listen to what was happening on the ground and respond as fast as we could. And that was really what created the Essential Fund here for Hispanics and Philanthropy, so we could get funds and money out to the community as fast as we can. And they were unrestricted funds. There were funds that could be used for bills, for rent, for food. It was really just meant to be able to give people support. So that was really the way in which Hispanics and Philanthropy was able to quickly pivot. And really, today is part of really celebrating and hearing from all of you about the ways in which your organizations responded. What did what were the partnerships that you all developed? What were some of the lessons learned and lessons that we're still learning? Where do we still need more support? Where do we still need to act? And so I'm really excited for this panel. I did want to share one project with everybody. As the pandemic was continuing in this last year, Hispanics and Philanthropy worked with a really amazing data visualization firm called Graffiti. And what we did is that we actually mapped out the COVID disparity as it was happening in the US and Latin America, and the way that it was impacting specifically Latinx communities in the US and then Latin American communities in Latin America. So I'm going to share my screen for a quick moment so I can share that with you all. All right. And I don't want to take time away, but I do want to share this really great website, and I'll also share it in the chat. But our COVID-19 impact disparity mapping project really looked at the ways in which COVID was impacting our communities, but it also highlighted the stories of resilience that each and every single one of you were working to respond to really this time of crisis. And actually, I remember, Marcos, I remember talking to you as we were preparing for this project as well. So I'm really excited to hear where you are. And then we also hired an investigative journalist who really looked at the ways in which COVID was impacting the Latino community from a financial perspective, healthcare perspective. What was the impact on migration, and also protecting our most vulnerable? And with this map, we also have it in español. La tenemos el mapa y las historias también en español. You're able to really see what the impact is just across communities. And so if I go into the map of Latin America, you're going to be able to you can click on a country, you can click on a state, you can see what the actual impact is according to the population, how many deaths, how many cases, how many recoveries. And it really gave us a snapshot of what was happening. And we were able to collect this data in Latin America. We used any open available data that we had at our disposal. And so that means that we used health data that was coming out from health ministries. We used information that was coming out from the government. And then we also looked at, on the US side, we actually looked at places that were running out of sanitation supplies. We were looking at even companies in terms of the toilet paper output that was coming out. And so we were able to really get a snapshot of what was happening and able to present what that impact truly was. In Mexico, we work with a group called Racismo MX, Racismo Mexico. And what we did is that we also created stories that highlighted the impact of COVID on vulnerable communities. So here you can look at stories like, sorry, my Slack is going, like Meraki, so the impact of COVID-19 on sex workers. We looked at the impact of COVID-19 on migrant communities, and we also looked on the impact of COVID on trans migrants as well. So I encourage everybody to please check out this map. Please feel free to go in and play with it. I do want to share the stories. So here you can see the different impact of the stories. So we have a Centro Cultural Latinos Unidos, Unlimited Potential, and you can actually go in here and hear directly from them how they responded to the pandemic. And the goal of this was also to ideally be able to create a place where you can support. So if you looked at the map and you could see that something was happening here in Nuevo Mexico, you could click to learn more about the Rio Grande Education Collaborative, and you could get involved with the work that they were doing there directly. So that's a little bit about the COVID Impact Disparity Project. I will stop sharing. I will share those links with everybody so you can all use it. But I really want to move into the main purpose of this workshop, the main purpose of this panel. And I'm really excited to introduce all of you to Jonathan Berezovsky from Migraflex, Marcela Diaz from Somos Un Pueblo Unido, as well as from Marcos from Comunidad Maya Pichan Ixim. So bienvenidos a todos. Welcome everybody. If you could do a quick introduction about yourselves, and we'll go ahead and move into the conversation.
Thank you, Hasnin. This is Jonathan. Argentinian. I've been living in Brazil since 2014. I'm based in Sao Paulo. And in 2015, I started Migraflex, which is an NGO that promotes the economic and social inclusion of migrants in the country through cultural entrepreneurship, meaning that we support small entrepreneurs that are starting new businesses which are connected to their culture or their identities. We support them in 3 fronts. The first one is providing training, both entrepreneurship training and technical training, so that they can start new businesses or accelerate a small business. We have a second front in which we connect entrepreneurs with sales channels for different products, mostly cultural products, and actually our main cultural product is food. So we're dealing mostly with food entrepreneurs. And we have a third front in which we provide individual mentoring for entrepreneurs and access to microcredit opportunities. We've been working mostly in Sao Paulo since 2015. Last year, we expanded to other cities in Brazil. And this year, in the second semester, we are expanding to Colombia and Peru. We understand that the challenges in Colombia and Peru are much bigger than in Brazil. So we have a lot of work to do in the coming months. So I'm very happy to be here and excited to hear from Marcela and Luis Marcos.
Go ahead, Luis, I think you're on mute.
I'll go. Can you hear me, Yasmin? Perfect. So my name is Marcela Diaz. I'm with Somos Un Pueblo Unido. We are based in New Mexico. Here in the United States, we are a statewide organization, and while founded and traditionally known as an immigrants' rights organization, we have evolved into an immigrant-based worker and racial justice organization. We always say if you're membership-based and your members are immigrants, ultimately you will become a worker center of sorts. And so that is not the exception for Somos. We have about 3,000 members in 8 counties, mostly rural and some semi-urban communities throughout our state. And we do impact litigation, community-driven grassroots policy advocacy, electoral work such as GOTV activities and voter registration. And of course, we organize workers in their work sites to improve working conditions, wages, and to counter retaliation. Ultimately, our goal is to build power for immigrant families and low-wage workers in our state. And we've identified various components of building power. Do we have the power to recruit new members, allies, and champions? Do we have the power to change practices and policies and laws that impact our daily lives? Do we have enough power in any given moment to defend our wins and our communities? Can we influence the public narrative about our lives? And ultimately, can we disrupt and balance power between workers and industry and between families and government? And that's who we are.
Thank you so much, Marcela. Marco, coming to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Jasmine, and all everyone at Hispanics in Philanthropy for putting on this conference and for inviting us to share. It's an honor to share with Jonathan and Marcela and to learn the important work that you're doing. My name is Luis Marcos, greetings from the traditional homeland of the Omaha Nation. We are here in the eastern part of Nebraska, western part of Iowa, in the Midwest here. I am Executive Director of Comunidad Maya Pishan Ishim. Pishan stands for, or it means spirit or heart. Ishim is corn. So the organization is a spirit of corn, and corn is a sacred element in Maya worldview and spirituality. So Comunidad Maya Pishan Ishim then is an organization of the Maya people here, and our mission is to really rebuild our lives with the understanding that we come from a highly sophisticated, advanced civilization, with the understanding also of the impact of this international legal construct known as the doctrine of discovery, which is the dehumanization of indigenous peoples. And with those two understandings, then we built, are rebuilding our lives here in the U.S. And we're grateful for, spaces like this where we are able to contribute to the conversations that are happening, especially when it comes to the impact of things like COVID-19. So I am eager to learn more from everyone, especially from Jonathan and Marcela here. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you, Marcos and Marcela and Jonathan. It's such a to have you all and to just really learn from everybody here today. So I want to jump into the questions. If you could really talk about the different approaches to funding during the pandemic and what the impact was on your organizations and in the community. And I think, and also where is the need still needed, right? Because like I said, especially Jonathan, I know you were based out of Brazil and you've done work in Latin America, but and Marcos también, as we're looking at Iowa and the Nebraska area, right, there's still a need for this, right? But if you can talk to us about just what these different funding approaches were for your organizations, and then how you were able to use that and leverage that for either for additional resources or just to really assist the community. And we can start with Jonathan. Go ahead.
Sure. Thanks. So before the pandemic, I think it's important to start from what is happening before and then how things changed last year. So before the pandemic, we were getting funding mostly from the private sector. Each one of our entrepreneurship programs had a sponsor. And we're always looking for companies that had synergy with the programs that we were developing. So for instance, when we started our first food entrepreneurship program back in 2017, which is called Roots in the Kitchen, which provided entrepreneurship training for refugees and immigrants and then connected them with sales channels. We brought Uber Eats as a sponsor to fund the program because we understood that we could build a win-win partnership with Uber Eats. At the end of the day, refugees and migrants who were going through the entrepreneurship program would be able, after the program, to start selling their dishes on Uber Eats. So we were providing a benefit to Uber Eats users, which was that people would be able to start ordering authentic food from Venezuela, from Syria, from Congo DRC, from India, from Mexico, from Bolivia, thanks to this entrepreneurship program that we are providing. So Uber Eats understood the added value, and we created this program together, and it worked out really well. And then we did the same thing with other companies. Actually, I brought a video to share just for everyone to understand what we were doing before. I brought a video of a project that we did in 2019 with Airbnb. It's also a cultural entrepreneurship program. I don't know if you're all familiar with the experiences of Airbnb, but what we did is we provided entrepreneurship training to refugees and immigrants from 20 different countries. And throughout this program, each one of them created sophisticated experiences that they started selling on the Airbnb platform, having 100% of the revenue going directly to the entrepreneurs. Thanks to this partnership with Airbnb wasn't keeping any of any commission. So I'm just going to share this video pretty quick, and then I'm going to talk about, this is what we were doing before and what happened last year and how we had to reinvent ourselves. So let me just share my screen. I hope this works. Let's see.
O Raíces na Cidade é um programa de empreendedorismo cultural do Migrants, apoiado pelo Airbnb, no qual estão participando 50 refugiados imigrantes de 20 países, de lugares como a Síria, a República Democrática do Congo, Venezuela e Bolívia. Cada um deles, ao longo do programa, está desenvolvendo um negócio a partir do conhecimento que eles trouxeram relacionado à economia, música, dança, artesanato. E, além disso, cada um deles está desenhando uma experiência cultural, uma experiência sofisticada e autêntica, que eles vão oferecer através da plataforma do Airbnb, tanto para os paulistanos como para os turistas que chegam em São Paulo, dando oportunidade para esse público de uma viagem pelo mundo sem sair dessa cidade.
A missão do Airbnb é criar um mundo onde todos possam pertencer, então parte de algo maior. Eu acho que isso tem tudo a ver com a missão também do Migrating, extrapolar também a parte só de viagem, de lazer, mas também onde você vive. Aqui em São Paulo, temos uma mistura tão grande de culturas diferentes, de histórias diferentes, de talentos diferentes. Então, ter a oportunidade dos refugiados ensinar isso para o mundo afora, na sua própria cidade, é uma coisa muito única. Eu acho que por isso que esse projeto está sendo tão especial e tem um propósito tão bacana que a gente está muito feliz de fazer parte.
Uma felicidade do seu programa é mostrar de amigos, fazer amizade com todos. Haver pessoas que creem, que até acreditam que o imigrante vem ocupar um lugar que lhe corresponde a ele. Não, o imigrante quer agregar suas experiências e culturalidade ao conhecimento da sociedade brasileira.
É muito importante para o mundo ver outro olhar para os imigrantes refugiados, para ver outro olhar porque há mais cultura, mais coisa bonita, cada país diferente. Até eu estou aprendendo muito. Então, da mesma forma que estou aprendendo, da mesma forma também o mundo vai poder aprender sobre os imigrantes refugiados.
Okay. You were able to hear the video, right? The sound was working? Good. So this is what we were doing before the COVID crisis. As you can see, we were bringing people together and we had lots of activities which were face-to-face. When the crisis started, it hit Brazil in March 2020. Obviously, we were forced to stop all of our activities. And the first thing we did was to organize a number of virtual calls with the members of our network, the migrants who had participated in previous programs, to understand how this crisis was affecting them. And based on those calls, we started creating new plans, and we had to obviously reinvent ourselves to see how we could keep providing support to small entrepreneurs, being able to meet them. So we came up with a plan to develop a new platform that was obviously mobile friendly, as most migrants in Brazil do not have a computer at home. So we had to build a mobile friendly platform that would provide training, access to sales channels, mentoring, 100% online. thanks to the support of Hispanics in Philanthropy and then other donors such as the IOM from the UN, we managed to develop this platform pretty quickly and launched this platform last year. We learned a lot throughout the pilot that we ran about 7 months, the first pilot. We learned quite a lot. We did lots of mistakes because it was the first time that we were dealing with an online platform. But while we were working on this pilot, we managed also to apply for funding from the IDB. There's the Better Together Challenge that I believe some of you may have heard. So we applied for this challenge, we were approved, and this year we're actually moving forward with all the lessons that we have learned from the pilot that we ran last year. We are executing this new version of the program, which is a hybrid program, mostly online, but we have a number of face-to-face activities that obviously, depending on the current context, sometimes we are able to execute them, sometimes we have to wait. But it's a program that works mostly online, that we are executing in Sao Paulo, in Boa Vista, which is a country in the north, it's a city in the north of Brazil, near the border with Venezuela. There is a humanitarian crisis. There are around 40,000 Venezuelans living there, and obviously the context is very, very different from Sao Paulo, so we are having to adapt the program, the entrepreneurship program, for the reality in Boa Vista. And as I mentioned, in the second semester, we're taking this program to Bogota and Lima. So yeah, in terms of funding, that's what we, before we're working 100% with the private sector. Nowadays, we're dealing mostly with the UN and the IDB.
Incredible, Jonathan. I think that community ingenuity of how quickly you had to pivot and the way you took it, you knew the community was mobile, you took it there, and you were able to get additional funding. So felicidades. I think that's really incredible. And I'm really excited to see that in Lima, Bogota, and really take off. So congratulations for all that incredible work and all the support. Very, very cool. Great. Marcela, if we want to come to you, and same question, different approaches in terms of the funding during the pandemic and also the impact on your work and in the community as well.
Hi, everyone. Just resetting the thank you, Yasmin and Jonathan and Luis. Really interesting presentation, and it's great to hear from folks around the hemisphere that are doing this work. I want to share a PowerPoint. It's not too many slides, I promise. I hope it works. Can you all see that? If you can't, I guess I won't share it.
We can see. Not sure if this is what you want us to see, but yeah, we can see it.
Perfect. This is great. So as I mentioned, Somos un Pueblo Unido is a community-based organization, and I just wanted to give you a little bit of sense about what we're doing in the state of New Mexico. New Mexico is a small, mostly rural state. 1 in 10 New Mexicans is foreign born. And even though we're only 1 in 10, we really do have an outsized impact in our economy, particularly in the oil and gas industry, and a major revenue generator for New Mexico, as well as other sectors. And the pandemic obviously posed many similar problems for New Mexico's essential workers, immigrant workers, as others across the country. And so we very early on decided that we really needed to, as a power building organization, identify some goals very early on in the pandemic. We wanted to narrow our, I'm gonna stop sharing this for a second. Oh, this is not what you want to see. I'm sorry. Okay, well, that didn't work. So now you'll just have to see my face as I go through this. We definitely wanted to continue to grow our base and our alliances despite working from Zoom and despite being in the midst of the pandemic. We wanted to narrow the information gap between our community and local governments both ways to kind of counter some of the disinformation in our communities, as well as really help policymakers understand what we were going through and what some of the exclusions were when it came to economic relief and other traditional COVID relief programs, and how it was impacting not just our families and our children, but also our local economies, particularly those with high numbers of undocumented immigrants. We wanted to influence the narrative around essential workers because, you know, one of the biggest challenges, as you all know, during the pandemic is that business is the sole motor of our economy, and that we need to heavily subsidize businesses and not necessarily workers in this pandemic. And we also wanted to challenge discriminatory policies that we all took for granted, deeply embedded in local and state policies, as well as national policies. And you know, that aren't acceptable. And so we were able to use the pandemic to really sort of challenge those. It was also very important that immigrant workers and families be at the forefront of that systemic change. So very early on, we helped convene a working group of community-based organizations called the New Mexico Economic Relief Working Group. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention them: New Mexico Voices for Children, El Centro de Igualdad y Derechos, CAFE, Comunidades de Fe en Acción, as well as the Partnership for Community Action. We provide, you know, we are wide in our geographic scope, and so we're very much based within communities and can really speak to some of the diverse challenges, not just in the urban centers of New Mexico, but in rural communities. We focused on the problems of our communities and really tried to communicate that in the public narrative with media and legislators. We held many roundtables, we did reports and polling and surveys across the state of folks and what their economic challenges were, particularly mixed status immigrant families. And as you all know, and I'll just repeat it quickly, you know, we don't have access to unemployment benefits, no federal economic relief. There are about 300,000 workers in New Mexico who have no access to paid sick leave, particularly difficult during the pandemic. And we identified about 68,000 workers in our state who just had no access to this. There were other issues. A lot of local government and private safety net programs just weren't cutting it for a lot of our folks. Not only did we not have access to the stimulus, but there were a lot of bureaucratic obstacles to third-party payment systems, which is really how most of the economic relief unfolded in our communities, right? Third-party payments to landlords, to phone companies, to utility companies. And it's not just immigrants who have very informal relationships who are undocumented because of their status, but also people with felonies on their records, really poor folks who don't have really good credit scores. And so we are creative in our community, and we managed to get phone service and utility service and contracts with landlords, even though we can't have those kinds of formal relationships. So a lot of that money that came in to business and through those third-party state payment programs just kind of missed our communities. Others had very onerous requirements, and in many cases, there was just a sheer lack of cultural competency when it came to relief programs, both by government as well as philanthropic resources. And that, of course, created just horrible situations for our communities. People had terrible choices when it came to their health and the health of their and the health of their families, while others received up to $1,000 a week. If they were underemployed or unemployed, it just completely bypassed our communities. And so what we did was we focused on marshaling philanthropic resources, but mostly government resources. It was so important to us to help undo some of the institutional barriers that excluded undocumented immigrants at the local level and at the state level. And so we did a lot of research and a lot of work to help, and a lot of the organizing work and policy advocacy to help some of our cities and counties and ultimately our state establish cash transfer programs, because we thought that was the least paternalistic and most immediate way to inject money into our families' finances as well as into our local economies, and also a way to counter some of those obstacles that I've already mentioned. And so we helped our city of Santa Fe establish a $2.6 million economic relief fund that gave between $750 and $3,000 to about 2,700 mixed status families, mostly undocumented immigrants. This was utilizing some of the CARES Act money that was funneled through our state to our communities. And we created a model that was followed in other parts of the state, right? And so ultimately our economic relief working group were able to marshal and to be able to get about $13.6 million in cash transfers from city and state governments. Now, at the state level, we knew that we didn't have the infrastructure to be able to dole out cash assistance the way that IRS does, obviously through stimulus payments, and our departments of labor through unemployment. And so we knew that we wanted the state to utilize both federal money and state money to be able to directly do direct deposits into our community and into our families. And so during 2 legislative sessions, we were able to, one a special session in December and one just recently that ended about a month ago, able to lobby legislators for $12 million in federal money that will go directly through our state, through our income support division of our Human Services Department, directly to families. This is so important because what it does is it undoes, again, the policy barriers to giving money, cash, to undocumented immigrant families. And so that was sort of some of the institutional change that we were looking for. One of the other things that we were able to win, in addition to this $20 million for our families, was really be able to focus some of our philanthropic resources to cash transfer programs in our communities. And that was really a shift, I think, for a lot of the community foundations here in New Mexico, like Con Alma, as well as the Santa Fe Community Foundation. They were really able to understand the need for these sorts of things. And most important, it helped sort of change the narrative around essential immigrant workers and the money that we need to recirculate in our economy and our outsized contributions to our state via our work as well as our taxes. We were able to go back to the legislative session and actually work with some of our community partners like New Mexico Voices for Children to expand the Working Families Tax Credit to ITIN holders or tax filers who are undocumented. And we're the 3rd state in the country to do this on a permanent basis. And so we were able to prime the pump at the legislature with giving cash and that kind of assistance of our money back to undocumented immigrant families. And so we would have eventually done this, but the pandemic really afforded us the opportunity to change the dynamic and to really help our community do that. Some of our next steps really are, and I'm watching my time, that we are now lobbying for the use of more ARPA money or the latest economic relief money at the federal level to provide even more relief to mixed status families across the state. We are continuing with our policy campaigns to include immigrants now that we're included in the tax credits and rebates at the state level in unemployment benefits and other cash assistance programs, such as our general assistance program. We're really interested in reforming the traditional safety net program that relies primarily on third-party payments and other types of service to a system that is expanded when it comes to cash assistance, a demonstrated poverty intervention that empowers families. We're also working to promote GBI or Guaranteed Basic Income programs now that we've gotten mayors and city councilors and county commissioners to really open up to the idea of giving just money to poor families and working people. And we are also working with our philanthropic partners to marshal more resources for cash transfer programs as one of the best ways to help empower low-income workers and families and create a more inclusive economic recovery. And so those are the things that we've really been working on in New Mexico quite successfully and really trying to figure out how do these short-term changes and these one-time economic relief programs that our state gives directly to communities how we can turn that into deeper, more systemic change, where we, again, are disrupting the power between our communities, government, and getting a little bit back from the incredible contributions that we make both in taxes, as well as in the workforce. And so that's a little bit about what we're doing in New Mexico and how we really decided to focus on government-sponsored programs that philanthropy could feed into, but that would really create some deeper systemic change in New Mexico. Thank you.
That was incredible, Marcela. And I'm glad that we're recording this because I think I would love a next conversation with you about the policy side of it, right? In terms of you created a model. I know New York City, I think, was actually looking to New Mexico as they were looking at their essential fund as well, that they just passed as well. So that's the next session that we need to plan is how do we continue to replicate these models and really start to move policy and move all these levers at once, because I think it's genius and just incredible work. So if we see that as for all of that work. Marcos, we're going to come to you. Same question, right? So, what was the impact of funding, and also what was the impact of on the community in terms of the work that you were all doing, and what were those shifts like as well? Oops, still muted. Sorry. Just click the little mic. Listo.
Technology, beautiful when it works, right? When you know how to work it. I am so happy to be invited here and to see you again, Jasmine, and learn from Jonathan and your work. And it's like so beautiful to bring people together and do things together. And also, your work with, how entrepreneurship and all this. And with Marcela, I wish I had that energy to engage government officials and policy makers, even though that's the goal here. We're building up our organizational infrastructure to get there, and we're definitely continue working. I just want to use a little bit, maybe borrow here Jonathan's format and just go back a little bit, give a little bit of background of who we are and what happened during COVID and how we are moving forward. So we are the Anjobal Maya people. We belong to the wider Maya nation. In our sacred calendar today is Uslukep Mulu. It is a time to ask for forgiveness and begin to have a common understanding of history in order to save our humanity and rebuild our lives, our common humanity, right? Who is the Maya nation? Our traditional territory is occupied by the southern part of Mexico, the entire state of Guatemala, and Belize, and the northwestern portions of El Salvador and Honduras. Those are contemporary states on Maya territory by virtue of an international legal construct known as the Doctrine of Discovery. In terms of population, we estimate that there are about 15 million people in our 15 million people in our traditional homeland, since there are no data on indigenous peoples. Our language comes from the Proto-Maya, dating back about more than 2,000 years. And our worldview and spirituality is really to live in harmony and equilibrium with humanity, Mother Earth, all forms of life in the universe. As an organization, we are a structural change organization, but during COVID-19, we definitely had to do direct service. I will, and in that spirit, I'll just maybe discuss a little bit, bring your attention to a document, a study called the Preliminary Study of the Impact of the Doctrine of Discovery on Indigenous Peoples. And this is a study done by the Permanent Forum on Indigenous Peoples at the United Nations. Basically, it's a system that dehumanizes indigenous peoples. It demonizes the identity of indigenous peoples. It takes away our authority to speak for ourselves. It's the basis for committing genocide against indigenous peoples, the taking away of our lands, displacements, and forced migration. Again, we estimate that there are at least 15 million in our traditional homeland, about 1 million of people of Maya origin in the United States. We estimate that there are about 8,000 in Nebraska and 2,000 in Omaha. The impact of COVID-19, I think we went through this during the initial times when we heard that COVID-19 was, that this continent was being affected, particularly, New York, where it started. We got really scared. We didn't know what to do, or we didn't know what was going to happen. And considering the status of indigenous peoples, we thought this would be the end of us. Of course, then we had to pause being a structural change organization and really go to provide direct support. And we are thankful to the philanthropic community, especially Hispanics in philanthropy here. We were able to provide small amounts of money to people with, to provide for rent and food. But we turned to our relationship with Mother Earth, and so we started to promote community garden. COVID-19 definitely revealed, disparities. If the Latino and Hispanic community talks about discrimination in the United States, I think it's important too to bring your attention that how you as Latino Hispanic discriminate against indigenous peoples as well, especially when making reference to Latin America. There were peoples like the Incas, the Mayas, the Aztecs. It is important to refer to these peoples by their name instead of just the states occupying a lot of these indigenous peoples continent as well. What we are doing, what's happening here is also, other than revealing, or besides or on top of revealing the disparities, it also revealed that there's a lot of wisdom in indigenous peoples' knowledge. Let us remember that before colonization, indigenous peoples flourished here. And so we really did go back to our wisdom and use Maya medicine to support us here. It is what is getting us through this pandemic, especially in Guatemala, for example. There is no state support whatsoever. And so what we have found out is that COVID-19 is not going to kill us, but the states continue to kill us here. Moving forward, what we really want to do is to invest in, again, our wisdom as indigenous peoples. We want to hear, for example, in the United States, have access to at least 40 to 400 acres of land so that we can implement a regenerative agriculture program so that we can do agriculture in the way that our ancestors did, because the way it's being done right now with monocultures, these extractive industries, and the ways agriculture is done right now is not sustainable. And so we definitely want to have access to our to at least 40 to 400 acres of land. We also want to secure this community center where we are talking right now. It has become a sacred site for us because this is where we perform our Maya ceremonies. We have a legal program, that defends, that is building infrastructure to defend the water and land defenders in our traditional homeland, provide legal accompaniment to immigrants here, to recent displaced indigenous peoples here in the U.S., but also, again, just following up here with Marcela Diaz here, we will be introducing legislation at the state of Nebraska for the UN recognition for the recognition of the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. And so we definitely are highlighting our presence as Indigenous peoples and nations with distinct political status, not just our culture and our folklore, but really the political dimension of our identity as Indigenous peoples. And so we continue to be thankful to Hispanics in Philanthropy for recognizing the presence of Indigenous peoples. I saw your letter back in 2020 at the end of the year, where you, as an institution, recognized that Indigenous peoples have been ignored here, and also the Black community, and so that brings a lot of healing. And I hope this continues within the cultural tradition of Hispanics in Philanthropy. And with that, thank you.
Thank you so much, Marcos. And I really love the idea of kind of like the land and the 40 to 400 acres of land that you're all trying to really reclaim and restore. So I'd love to learn more about that as you go through that progress. And also I'm loving the connection between you and Marcela as well in terms of the policy side, right? Like how do you also start to move that information forward? So thank you for that incredible work. And thank you also, I think, for Science and Philanthropy this last year, well, actually the last couple of years has been also rooted in terms of the narratives in confronting our own anti-indigeneity in communities, right? Not just anti-Blackness, but anti-indigeneity in terms of how we talk about the work. How do we talk about, Indigenous communities that are from Latin America or Mexico, or Central America here in the United States, and making sure that we are calling them by their name correctly. So thank you for bringing that up. It's something that we're actively trying to do and actively encouraging, everybody, our grantees, but also even our own funders of how to do that and how to really recognize that difference, right? Because it's a very critical difference. So thank you all for sharing a little bit of that. We do have one question. What is one thing you would like funders to keep doing as we continue to recover from the impacts of COVID-19? So I'll let you, I think Marcos, you look like you're ready, so we can go ahead and start with Marcos. Entrale.
Well, I don't think there will be any surprise here. I just wanted to say, Indigenous peoples really, when I the emerging term right now is BIPOC, Black Indigenous. I'm assuming Black Indigenous, peoples of color. I would ask to reverse that, Indigenous peoples, Black, and so that really go back to our indigeneity, to our roots, because we do have that we share that. There's about in philanthropy, only 1% of money raised go to Indigenous peoples, like only 1%. The rest goes to so many organizations here. So also Indigenous peoples organizations are also emerging. It's really new. So I don't really want to use up too much, but I don't think there's any surprise there in my response. So thank you, Yasmin. Just keep Indigenous peoples organization, reinforce organizational infrastructure of Indigenous peoples organization, because without investment in our organizational infrastructure, we will not be able to respond to the needs of our communities.
You got it. Thank you. Marcela or Jonathan?
Like Louise, I think my answer will be obvious. Just keep investing in organizing and in power building organizations that can really articulate, or who want to be able to articulate just how to create those shifts in the power dynamics in our communities, whether again it be through workers and industry or low-income families and government, and really investing in community-based organizations, which is what a lot of the HIP grantees already do. Obviously, investing in people of color based and led organizations. And I also think that, I won't obviously make a big pitch for services or even for investment in cash transfer programs, but if foundations really are looking to support folks who are struggling with COVID, think about guaranteed basic income programs, think about, in addition to the advocacy and the organizing around getting government to meet these challenges, that we really do need that kind of support, and it's hard to come by. And so unfortunately, we already know that infusion of cash into communities obviously works. That's why we have unemployment. That's why we have stimulus dollars. I mean, but you know, when you're poor people of color, particularly in mixed status, you have to just keep proving it over and over again. So help us prove it.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. Jonathan.
Yeah, so well, I'm just going to build on top of what Marcela was saying. Obviously, cash transfers is super important. In our case, since we're dealing with entrepreneurs, we usually provide seed funding for small entrepreneurs who are starting new businesses. In many cases, they don't even have enough savings to buy the ingredients they need to make the business and start selling in their neighborhoods. So the seed funding is crucial. And I think as an organization, what we need is much more flexibility from funding partners. We have some funding partners, like for instance, we received this grant from Hispanics in Philanthropy, and you guys were super flexible because once you have to reinvent yourself, you need to start trying different paths. And if you have to stick to the proposal that you sent back then for a one-year program, then it's really, really hard to innovate. And we have seen with other partners which are much bigger, funding partners such as the UN, the International Organization for Migration, or the IDB, they're not as flexible when it comes to how you're going to use those funds. So you present the proposal for a one-year project, and they expect you to do exactly what you thought you were going to do a year ago. And that's really, that actually ends up harming innovation and harming, at the end of the day, the entrepreneurs that you're trying to support. So I think we need much more flexibility from funding partners to work in a much more agile environment.
Fantastic. Thank you. And I have, Marcos, some people want to connect with you. And I think for all of you, and Jonathan and Marcela as well, if you would be willing to share your email, please do so that folks can connect with you. And I think that's part of the purpose of the summit, is to be able to connect with each other and build with each other and learn from each other, right? I think everybody's doing such incredible work that is so important, and it's so different, and it's so innovative, but it's so rooted in community that it's just great to be able to share that and continue to build, right? So this conversation is definitely not meant to be the one time only. I want to be mindful of time because I just found out that we do get cut off at the top of the hour. So I just want to take it back to all of you. Any closing remarks, any last thoughts that you really want, whether it's different organizations to walk away with, or any advice that you would have for anyone as we're still kind of working through it. Any last bit of advice or any last words?
In the interest of time here, just to say thank you for just this opportunity to share. Thank you, Jasmine, Jonathan, Marcela. Best wishes to you and all that you're doing. And to those that joined the conference, also thank you. And I think what we're saying here, what we're really saying here is that we are one human family, that no one is free until everybody is free, and that we want to contribute to the well-being of our common humanity here. And so I hope that the philanthropic community also grateful. And so thank you again, and gracias.
Marcela, how about you?
Well, after that, I think that Luis hit the nail on the head. There was another question just about solidarity, and I think that, we have to be nimble and take advantage of every single opportunity. We often talk about disaster capitalism and how corporations use these catastrophes to deregulate and put into place institutions and policies that will benefit them. And so we have to do the same thing. And I think that that's what we're all doing and what we will continue to do as we build back better, as we try to get within that realm of economic recovery so that we're not left behind. It's a lot of work. We shouldn't have to work so hard for it, but it is what it is. So thanks everyone for wanting to support and for supporting. And also just HIP that provided funding, easy funding very early on for the advocacy work that our organizations have done.
So thank you all. Thank you, Marcela, Jasmine, and Marcos for this great conversation. And regarding the last question about solidarity for workers across many geographies, I think that this type of online meetings between organizations that are in different states or countries is really productive because we are able to learn from each other. Obviously, this conversation is a bit short, so we would need more time. But in terms of participating in events in which we get to hear from other organizations, it's really, really interesting for us because there aren't so many things happening in Brazil supporting immigrants as there are in the US. So I think we have a lot to learn from all of you guys. Obviously, the contexts are much different. Marcela, I told Marcela last week about, the situation in the US. Funding from federal government, state government is very different from the situation in Brazil. Obviously, there are some opportunities that exist in the US and not in Brazil, but I think there's other things that we can learn from each other. So I'm always glad to participate in such virtual meetings and hoping that we can meet again in the short run.
Well, with that, thank you so much, Marcos, Jonathan, and Marcela. And I think in the same Mayan tradition of in Lakesh, right? You are my other me, and in the ways in which we need to look out for each other, support each other, build community together, love each other, and just keep doing this incredible work. So I know that this is not the last time Hispanics in Philanthropy will be connecting with all of you and highlighting the work and making sure that this synergy keeps going. So thank you so much for your incredible work, the resilience, the ingenuity, the innovation, the agility. It's just incredible to hear it. And I'm really excited to hopefully circle back with everyone and do a longer interview with each and every single one of you and really highlight this powerful work. So thank you so much. Muchísimas gracias a todos. Que tengan bonito bonita semana, not fin de semana todavía, it's only Tuesday. But everybody have a wonderful week. And thank you so much again, Luis, Jonathan, and Marcela for your incredible work. So thank you.